everyone, it's Tim from timgagner.com, your place for online painting lessons. I've had a lot of questions lately about acrylic paint. It's the middle of summer now and it's hot everywhere. Even here in northern Maine it's pretty hot. It's like 84 degrees today, which is really hot for us. So a lot of people are kind of frustrated because the paint's drying so quickly. And they want to know, what do I do to keep my paint a little bit wetter longer so it doesn't dry up so fast. I do have a couple tips for you, but before I go over these tips, it is true acrylic paint dries fast. There's really no way around it other than you have to paint a little bit faster and use a couple different tricks to make it last longer. So even though it does dry really fast in the summer, there's a few things you can do to kind of help yourself out. First of all, look at your environment. Are you in an air-conditioned room? If you're in an air-conditioned room where there's air blowing in the room, your paint's going to dry really fast. It doesn't matter if it's hot or cool in the room, that circulating air dries the paint out super fast. I do workshops all over the country, and usually the room I'm in is air conditioned, and I see it myself. The paint dries super fast. Here in northern Maine, I don't need air conditioning very much, so my studio, it's in a lower level of my house, and it's cool in here, and there's no air conditioning, so that kind of helps me out. The paint doesn't dry quite as fast. Dehumidifiers also make your paint dry out a little bit faster. What you can do is put a humidifier in the room to keep the room have more humidity in it. You probably don't really want to do that too much if it's a super humid area that you live in, but humidity in the room will help. So you can get a humidifier, kind of set it out by where you're painting, and that will help a little bit. Another thing you can do, I'm going to put some paint here on my palette. Now we're talking about the palette here in a second, but we'll see how long that lasts before it dries out a little bit. But another thing you want to think about is the amount of paint that you use when you're painting. A lot of times people use really thin layers on acrylic paint, and when it's really hot and dry out, those thin layers dry out super fast. It seems like you're just putting paint on there and it's drying instantly as you're putting it on the canvas. And that's just because your layers are too thin. With acrylic paint, you really have to load up your brush, really like goop it onto your palette and then put it onto your canvas. The thicker your paint, the slower it's going to dry. So if you're kind of inexperienced with acrylics, you're probably most likely going to want to save money and not use as much paint, but that's also going to hurt you because the paint's going to dry out so quickly. So just think about the amount of paint you're putting on your brush and on your palette. If you're working on a big canvas like this, you're really going to have to put really a lot of paint on the palette so it doesn't dry out so fast, especially in the summer. So let's talk about the palette. I use wax palette paper. It's called Gray Matters. You can get it on Amazon or Blick or any of the art supply stores. But it's coated wax paper, so it's shiny and it doesn't absorb the moisture out of the paint. The paint sits right on top. If you're using like paper plates or anything porous, wood that's not treated, it's going to suck the moisture out of the paint and dry it out faster. So you want to use a surface. You could use, they have these palette boxes. This paper fits right in the box, and you know, this is oil paint, but you can drop the paper right in there, put the cover on in between kind of your steps, and that will keep your paint from drying out as fast too. You can also buy sponges that you can dampen and put under your palette paper in this box, which will also help the paint dry slower. You could also use a misting bottle if you want and mist over your paint on your palette. I don't really do that anymore. I used to, but I don't really find that it helps that much unless you mix the water into the paint after you mist it. What I find is that the paint itself is somewhat waterproof in a way. The little the little piles that you have on your palette. So when you spray it, the water kind of lands on it and then kind of just comes off it. So if you do mist it, you might want to take like a clean brush and then just go around and mix all your piles. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But the misting bottle, yeah, it works, but you have to be kind of tedious with it. And then if you mist on the canvas, you run the risk of getting those runny spots or the paint coming off the canvas. So I've gone away from the misting bottle, but it can still work, especially if you use like a slow dry medium in the misting bottle rather than just water. One of the other big tips that I have for slowing the paint down a little bit, as you're painting, if you're using like the same brush for a long period of time, the bristles themselves are going to start to dry out because the water is going to evaporate out of them, and the paint is actually going to start drying in the bristles, making them even more absorbent of the moisture in the paint. So every once in a while you want to take some water. I've got some nice dirty water here for you guys. You want to take the brush, dip it in water, okay, and then just take a rag and clean your brush off every once in a while. So even if you're using the same brush, the same colors, every once in a while, say every 5 minutes or so, dip your brush in water, clean it off a little bit, and then go back to it. If you dip your brush in water a little bit, you don't have to wipe it off completely. You can leave some of the moisture in there. You can just kind of brush the water off, and that way it keeps the bristles kind of moist. Like if I feel this here, they're still wet without it being runny and making your paint runny. So every once in a while, you know, you're working on clouds or something that take a long time, you're going along, you feel like the paint's getting tacky, just dip your brush in water, clean it off, then dip it in again, and then just wipe it off, and then go back to your same paint colors and go back to your clouds or whatever you're working on. Okay, just so you can see that up close, if you're painting along, you're using a color, I'm just gonna kind of wipe this off here. And I can actually feel the bristles starting to get a little bit dry right now. All you do is you dip your brush in water, wipe it off a little bit, and that's enough moisture to kind of reactivate the paint. So you might find, depending on your climate, that you have to dip the brush in water every other time. And you can add a little bit of water to your paint. Dip the brush in, you see, grab some water, add a little bit of water in there, and that will slow it down too from drying. But you don't want a ton of water in there because it will break down the chemical compounds of the paint and make it more transparent. So it alters the paint a little bit, so you have to be aware of that. So just dipping your brush a little bit and then coming to the paint after you wipe it off is probably the best technique. So the amount of paint. If you're working on a large canvas and you're only putting that much paint on there, that amount of paint right there will dry in minutes. And I hate to waste paint, but I'm going to do it for you guys. But you really need to put a lot of paint on your palette. When I'm going through my paintings, and this is a little bit older paint, so it's already a little bit sticky, so you can take a little bit of water and mix it right in. But I use a ton of paint. I load my brush up like this, have tons of paint on the brush, and that keeps it from drying so fast. But don't use a little tiny pile like that for a big canvas. Use a big pile for a big canvas. Okay, so to recap, if you have air conditioning in your room, you know, you might want to turn it off and just suffer the heat for a little bit. Any circulating air, even a fan, the air circulating is going to dry the paint out. So it stinks because it's summer and it's hot, but if you want your paint to dry a little bit slower, you're going to have to go without the air conditioning for a little bit. Maybe just, like, you know, if you're working on a really large area, just turn the air conditioning off for that part and then turn it back on for the smaller parts where you're just layering, where it doesn't matter quite as much. Dehumidifiers, same way. Maybe add a humidifier with your air conditioning. That might help a little bit too. Also, the surface that you put your paint on, If it's porous, it's going to make the paint dry faster. If your brush starts to dry out, it's going to make the paint dry faster. If you're not using enough paint, it's going to dry out faster too. You can use a misting bottle. You can add little bits of water, but make sure you mix it into the paint rather than just on top of the paint. That way it will dry slower. So the surface you paint on also is going to make the paint dry faster. If it's a really textured canvas, it will dry faster. If it's been gessoed quite a few times, it will dry faster. So there's just so many things that make it dry fast. Acrylic paints can be tough, but if you use large amounts of paint right in the beginning, it makes it a little bit easier, and use some of those tips that I gave you. And you can probably get through it and through this summer. Because pretty soon we'll be into winter where you put the heater on and the heater will dry out the paint. So acrylic paints are tough, and that's why I do the lessons online. So if you have any questions, you can visit my website at timgagne.com or join the Facebook group page, and I'm happy to help you out there too. That's actually where I got the question from, and hopefully this will help you out a little bit. So if you're interested in online painting lessons, make sure you visit my website at timgagne.com. I have a large variety of online painting lessons, and I also travel the country and Canada teaching in-person workshops. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.